Why are people sometimes mixing up narcissism and autism? How can we tell the difference? And what could be done differently after we understand what we're dealing with? So I got this little whiteboard with me today, and I want to talk about this question exactly because in my clinic, many times I see people that are wondering about this. I know these are two very different things. They come from very different places within the soul and our brain, but still, many times the first thing that is in common to those two conditions is the question about empathy. Okay, people come and tell me, well, I'm dealing with this spouse or friend or colleague or boss that doesn't understand my feeling, that doesn't see me, doesn't have the ability to to be empathic, to understand what I'm going through. And I keep on asking myself whether this is coming from a place of autism or this is coming from a place of narcissism. And the question is very important. And of course, it's important to understand what's going on so that we, first of all, will know what we're dealing with. And afterwards, we'll be able to understand what to do differently on these very different two situations. So, okay, I'll go back and say, I understand. When somebody like that comes and talks to me, I'll start asking questions. I understand that empathy is not something that you're getting from this person, either or. What I start asking people is about things that tell the difference between autism and narcissism, and these are the things that I wrote down here. First of all, the first one is a thing I call reading the room. Okay, and this is something that is very different between narcissists and autists and people that are dealing with autism. Why? Because narcissists are very good at reading the room. They understand what's going on. They know who's feeling what, who's having a more difficult time. All of that stuff. They understand. They understand what's going on. They understand people. They understand the way they feel. They just don't care, and that is a whole different thing from autism, which is a condition that makes it difficult for you to understand what's going on in the room, to understand that somebody is upset, to understand that somebody is happy, to understand that somebody is tired. The difficult is getting what's going on. And that's the autism side. On the other hand, with the narcissist, it's not only that he can read the room, he can read the room many times better than you and me. Okay? He knows exactly what's going on and who's feeling what. He just doesn't care. That's a very big difference. That's a very important first step to tell the difference. Okay? Reading the room. The second thing I want to mention is the fact that narcissists are driven by the need for power and control. Okay? When they walk into a room and they want to read the room, the reason they're doing it is because they want to be in control. They want things to be done their way or the highway. Otherwise, they're not happy with it. This is what's driving them. They don't they don't try to understand what's going on because they want to be good and they want to be nice and they want to treat you in a good way. They want to do that so that they can control whatever is going on, so they can manipulate people and they can get whatever it is that they are looking for themselves. So that's the big difference. Number two, while regarding people with autism, they have a very hard time reading a room and they're not looking for control and power. That's not something that interests them. It's not in their scope of things that they are looking for in life, and that is also a very, very big difference. And it looks very different. Okay. So we talked about empathy being in common, the difficulty with empathy. But then we talked about reading the room and power and control that are things that are typical of narcissists, and people with autism don't do it. Okay. So those are number two and number three on this list. The third thing that is very important is I wrote down is taking responsibility. Okay. And narcissists don't take responsibility. That is like the big thing. Okay. That is why they need to manipulate everybody. That is why they need to be in control of whatever is going on, so that God forbid nobody is going to say that this is their responsibility, and they will have to look within into this dark hole that they have within their soul, and try to deal with something that they cannot go into. That is the disease. That is what narcissism is about. On the other hand, people with autism, even though they have a hard time understanding, They might have a difficulty understanding what is being asked of them. Why is somebody telling them to take responsibility? And of course, I forgot to mention, I'm talking about very high functioning autism, what was called in the past Asperger syndrome, that kind of autism. uh, uh, when you work with somebody with autism, when you do deep work with somebody who has autism, you can teach them when to look within as much as you can and to take responsibility. And see, even though it's difficult, but they're not against it. It's not something that they are going against, that they are not willing to accept in any way, shape, or form. While narcissistic people do that. So this is what we talked about today, the difference between autism and narcissism, why it is so important to know it. I see that many times in my clinic every day, almost every day, once in a while anyway, people that are trying to understand whether they are dealing with autism or narcissism. This is the common ground, the fact that both conditions have a hard time being empathic, being understanding what it is, being empathic to your behavior, not understanding what it is. The narcissists do get to read the room. They do understand. They just don't care. And that is a big difference. They also work from the motive of controlling and taking power of whatever is going on. And they have a hard time, very, very hard time taking responsibility. So those are the 4 points I wanted to talk about today. I hope this really helps you and gets to you in a point in your life or whatever, somebody around you that needs to know this information. And I would really appreciate it if you forward it to people who are looking for this kind of information. You're also welcome to look at the next video that will be right here, I think, that talks about healing and recovering from narcissistic relationships. You're welcome to join this new channel, of course, and to subscribe and to ask questions. I'll be more than happy to answer, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye bye.